Hi, this is DJ James from musicmoose.org, and with this lesson what I want to do is get back to the guide tones. And I know from those of you who've been following these lessons, getting back to guide tones is kind of a laughable concept since I bring it up in every lesson. But, like I say in every lesson, most important thing you can know about jazz guitar is knowing your guide tones. Most important thing you can know about being an improviser, about being a jazz musician, is knowing your guide tones. So what I want to do this time is fill in our guide tones. Now, we talked about scales of the moment way back when, and we talked about guide tones just about through every lesson. So how do we combine the idea of the guide tones, combine the idea of the scale of the moment, and at the same time further our understanding of the ways in which tonal harmony and modal harmony can be linked, the ways that we can sort of play both of them together. And that's exactly what I'm going to get at today. If you remember back to the lesson where we were dealing with guide tones inside of the rhythm changes, what I want to do right now is fill in the guide tones. And what I mean by that is before we were playing them essentially very slowly as this melodic motion. Something like that, you know, that kind of guide tone melody, that type of guide tone line. What I want to do now is fill in the gaps between those guide tones and use the modes that we already talked about to fill in those gaps and create the scale of the moment and start to understand what happens as chords pass when we're improvising. So let's start with our B flat right here. When we have that B flat 6, our guide tones, because it's a 6th again, are either B flat and D or G and D. Our guide tones are usually the 3rd and the 7th, but with that chord, there is no 7th, so we use the 6th or the root. What we can do is fill in the space in between those guide tones. So what I mean by that is we have all those available notes between the G and the D. Or between the D and the G, we've got all of that available as well. What notes there do we use to avoid playing, you know, chromatic solos that go, and that would be ridiculous and boring. What notes do we choose? The way that we choose those notes are by essentially working through our scales of the moment, by working through our modes. What's available? Well, say we're playing in the rhythm changes again. And say we're on this C minor here. What's available? Our guide tones are E flat and B flat. Well, generally, in terms of scales of the moment, we want to choose a mode, choose a scale that has that E flat and the B flat. And there is a subtle distinction between scale and mode, something that I'm going to talk about in future lessons. But for right now, I'm using the words rather interchangeably, but recognize that there is a subtle distinction that eventually we'll get back to. But for right now, whatever mode, whatever scale we choose has to have the E flat and the B flat in it. What other notes are available? Well, since we're playing a C major 7, we may as well choose a mode that has C and G as well. So we know we're going to have those 4 notes in there. What else do we want to fill in? Well, if we think back to our tonal harmony, anytime you have a scale, anytime you have a mode, you have to have a note basically of spelled with each letter. So if we have a C, well, now we need some sort of D in there as well. We could choose a D flat, but that might give us something really strange. Might also give us something pretty hip. But if we're playing something that's pretty straightforward, we're going to want to choose a D natural, something that, again, is pretty germane to the rest of the progression. Since we have a D natural in the B flat, while we're playing over the C, we may want to include a D natural as well. We have the E flat. Now we can add an F. We can even add an F sharp if we want to get a little funky with it and add that sharp 11 or something along those lines, or that sort of little chromatic approach that I played there. So I think we'll add the F and also the A natural, because it's going to be part of the F7, the B flat, and the C. Essentially what we did was took these 2 guide tones, our E flat and our B flat, filled out the rest of the notes in between those guide tones. So If we start out with a B flat, C, D, E flat, then F, G, A, B flat. And if we look at it, lo and behold, we have a C Dorian. Now when we get to the F, we're going to do the same things. Our guide tones are an A and an E flat. We want to fill out what's in between there. We're going to do it by, again, choosing notes that are germane to the rest of the progression and that work musically within the context of what we're trying to do here. So if we have our A flat and our E, well, we're going to want to have the F and the C since we're already playing an F7 chord. We just came from a C which has a G in it. We have an A in the chord. We're ultimately aiming for B flat, so maybe we want to have a B flat, maybe we don't. I'll come back to that in a second. C is in the chord. The D is going to be in the chord next to it. E flat is in the chord and F is in the chord. So we're pretty much dictated that we're going to use an F Mixolydian mode there as our scale of the moment. Then once we get to the B flat, we have essentially a B flat and a D. And in order to fill out, we use our C, which was part of our first chord, D, which is part of the chord we're at now, E flat, which is part of the F7. We might want to choose something different. I'll come back to that in a second as well. F, G, which we've already had, D, or excuse me, A, and then B flat. It's pretty much decided for us what we're going to play there. Now, the only two exceptions that I really sort of worked with in choosing your scale of the moment were when I got to the fourths of the chords. When I got to the F, the fourth would be a B flat, and I said maybe we don't want a B flat. The reason that you always want to be careful with the fourths, and this will kind of make some sense as I start to talk about it, it'll make more sense, I should say, as I start to talk about it, is for two reasons. First of all, if you start to play the fourth of a dominant chord, or say if I play the fourth of the F7, that B flat, I start to create a little bit of sonic ambiguity. I don't really know what chord I'm playing. Am I playing some sort of B flat? Or am I playing some sort of F? And that's really the distinction. So instead what I want to do, and it'll make the chord sound a little bit hipper, is just sharpen that fourth, which eventually becomes a sharp 11 when we're talking about the upper structure. And we get a little bit of a hipper scale there, which is essentially an F Mixolydian with a sharp 11. When we get into talking about modes that are derived from the minor scales, you'll see exactly where these come from. When we get to the B flat, essentially the same thing is happening. Once we get to that B flat, I don't want to throw an E flat in that chord. The reason I don't want to throw an E flat in that chord is because the combination of the E flat and the B flat are going to make it sound like I'm playing an E flat major, and I don't know where I'm resolving. So instead, let's sharpen that E flat. And now we have something a little bit cooler. It's essentially a Lydian mode there. And this is how we choose our scale of the moments. Now, if you think to our lessons on altering dominance, you know that you can toss in a whole bunch of other stuff, especially when you get to that dominant seventh chord. But as is always said when you're learning music theory, first you have to learn all the rules before you're allowed to break them. And right now, I'm teaching you what all the rules are, and then eventually we'll get back to breaking them. For musicmoose.org, I'm DJ James.